This is not a story about war. Venezuela wasn't conquered by an army. There was no invasion, no front line, no declaration. And yet, control still changed hands. Not because Venezuela was defeated in battle, but because its options disappeared. And once that happens, resistance doesn't matter. Because power isn't held by whoever has the most soldiers. It's held by whoever decides what gets paid. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. More than Saudi Arabia. More than Russia. Over 300 billion barrels sitting beneath the ground. Enough to power entire economies for generations. It sits at the geographic gateway to the Caribbean, controlling shipping lanes that connect North and South America. That funnel trade between oceans. This is not some failed state with a flag and a hope. Venezuela has institutions, ministries, a bureaucracy that processes millions of transactions. It has a military with ranks, uniforms, command structures. It has intelligence, networks that monitor threats, track rivals, maintain files. It has allies who attend summits, sign agreements, provide backing. This is a state with infrastructure, with history, with leverage. Weak states fall from outside pressure all the time. A coup here, a collapse there, a government that can't pay its police 1 month and can't open its ministries the next. But Venezuela didn't fall like that. Something else happened. You don't need to conquer a country if you can control its decisions. If Venezuela wasn't weak, then force alone can't explain what happened. Strength doesn't immunize you against losing control. It just changes how control is taken. So what does? The answer starts long before any soldiers arrived. It starts with revenue. Oil is Venezuela's lifeblood. The state runs on it. Every salary, every pension, every public service, every road repair. The military is paid by it. The elites profit from it. Teachers receive their checks because oil was sold. Hospitals receive supplies because oil revenue cleared. When oil prices are high, the system works. Money flows in. Budgets balance. Loyalty is affordable. Dissent is manageable. The government can fund enforcement and services at the same time. When oil prices drop, everything tightens. But Venezuela's problem wasn't just price. It was production. Oil production had been declining for years. The industry was mismanaged. Equipment broke down and wasn't replaced. Expertise left and wasn't rebuilt. Wells that should have been maintained were abandoned. Refineries that should have been upgraded were left to rust. What should have been the easiest wealth in the world to extract became harder and harder to access. Output dropped. Revenue dropped with it. Then came sanctions. Sanctions don't work the way people think. They don't make a government suddenly stop functioning. They work slowly. They cut off access to spare parts. They freeze bank accounts. They stop insurance companies from covering shipments. They block buyers from purchasing oil even if they want it. They make every transaction harder, slower, more expensive. They shrink the list of people willing to deal with you. And over time, that shrinkage becomes structural. It's not just that you can't sell oil easily. It's that you can't maintain the systems that extract it in the first place. Revenue doesn't just decline. Options decline. When your income drops, you can't fund everything at once. You start making choices. Pay the soldiers or pay the teachers. Maintain the power grid or maintain the hospitals. Keep the ports open or keep the police equipped. Every choice you make creates a group that feels abandoned. Every cut creates resentment. Every delay creates doubt. And when the money slows, loyalty becomes a cost-benefit analysis. The military stayed loyal, but loyalty is expensive. Soldiers need paychecks. Generals need accounts. When the money slows, loyalty becomes transactional. It's not about ideology anymore. It's about survival. A general with 3 kids and a mortgage isn't thinking about geopolitics. He's thinking about whether his bank account will clear next month. He's thinking about whether his family is safe. He's thinking about his exit plan. Loyalty doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes, quietly, individually. One officer at a time starts making private calculations. One official at a time starts moving money offshore. One minister at a time starts hedging. They're not traitors, they're just rational. And rationality under pressure looks a lot like betrayal. The elites face the same math. They're not thinking about the nation. They're thinking about their families, their assets, their properties in Miami, in Madrid, in Panama. They're thinking about which passport will work if things fall apart. They're thinking about how to convert what they have into something portable. They don't want the state to collapse, but they're preparing for it anyway. Venezuela had allies. Russia, China, Iran, Cuba. These are not minor players. These are states with militaries, with resources, with their own strategic interests. But allies don't fight wars for you when the cost is too high and the return is too uncertain. They sell you weapons. They offer loans with interest. They make statements at the UN. They buy your oil at a discount. But they don't put boots on the ground to save your government. They don't risk their own economies. They don't send their own sons to die. Because even allies operate on the same logic. Cost versus benefit. Risk versus reward. And when the math doesn't work, friendship becomes conditional. Russia needs stability in its own region. China needs supply chains that function. Iran has its own wars. Cuba has no capacity to project force. They can provide rhetoric. They can provide limited support, but they cannot provide salvation. Pressure doesn't need to destroy a state. It only needs to remove its good options. You can't declare bankruptcy and start fresh. You can't negotiate debt relief without giving up control of key institutions. You can't raise revenue without oil production, and you can't fix oil production without investment, and you can't get investment without security, and you can't guarantee security without funding, and you can't get funding without revenue. It's a loop with no exit. Every door you try to open requires something you no longer have. When every option is bad, the least bad one starts looking like survival. And that's when the offer finally makes sense. Let's be clear about what without war actually means. It doesn't mean no military action at all. It means no mass invasion, no sustained combat across the entire country, no occupation-first doctrine, no years of grinding warfare with tens of thousands of troops dug into every province, no supply lines stretching across continents, no field hospitals and drone strikes and convoys being ambushed on highways. What replaces war is speed. You don't fight the whole country. You remove the leadership. You paralyze the command structure. You move faster than the system can react. You don't give the bureaucracy time to organize. You don't give the military time to choose sides. You don't give the public time to mobilize. You act while the decision-making center is still trying to understand what's happening. Intelligence dominance means you know where everyone is. You know their schedules. You know which roads they take, which buildings they sleep in, which phones they use. You know their security details. You know their vulnerabilities, their habits, their mistakes. You don't need to guess. You already have the map. You've been watching for years. Leadership decapitation is not new. Empires have been killing kings for millennia, but the logic has changed. You don't occupy first and negotiate later. You remove the top, create a vacuum, and present a solution before anyone else can organize one. The gap between removal and replacement is measured in hours, not weeks. And in that gap, control shifts. Because once leadership is gone, the system doesn't know what to do. Who gives orders? Who confirms them? Who signs the paychecks? Who authorizes force? Every level of command starts looking around for someone to tell them what to do. And if no one appears, they start making their own decisions. And those decisions are almost never fight to the death. They're wait and see. They're stay neutral. They're secure my position. The offer doesn't sound like conquest. It sounds like help. Temporary stabilization, transition support, protect the people, restore order. The language is soft. The framing is humanitarian. We're not here to occupy. We're here to ensure continuity, to prevent chaos, to make sure the lights stay on and the hospitals stay open and the ports keep functioning. And here's the critical part. To many people, that offer sounds rational, because they've been living through scarcity, through blackouts, through empty shelves, through crime waves, through uncertainty. They don't see an empire arriving, they see order arriving. They see someone who can actually pay the police, someone who can actually keep the water running. Delegation under pressure feels different than surrender. It feels like relief. But the moment power shifts is never announced as the moment it's lost. Here's what most people miss. Control is not a flag on a building. Control is not a president giving a speech. Control is levers, money, enforcement, legitimacy, administration. You don't need to hold every city. You don't need to patrol every street. You don't need to occupy every ministry. You need to hold the one thing that funds everything else: revenue. Venezuela's oil revenue doesn't flow through some abstract system. It flows through specific ports, specific banks, specific contracts, specific transactions that happen in specific places with specific people signing specific documents. And if someone else administers those flows, even temporarily, even under the guise of stabilization, they control the budget. And if they control the budget, they control what gets funded. The military needs pay. Not speeches, not slogans, pay. Actual transfers into actual accounts. The police need equipment, not promises. Equipment, vehicles that run, radios that work, ammunition that arrives. The bureaucrats need salaries, not ideology. Salaries, money that clears so they can feed their families. If all of that depends on someone else releasing the funds, then every decision becomes conditional. Every order requires approval. Every initiative requires sign-off. You can still have authority in theory, but in practice, you're asking permission. And once you're asking permission, you've already lost. To resist, you need coordination. People working together toward a goal. But coordination requires communication. Phones that work. Internet that's on. Channels that aren't monitored. Meetings that aren't infiltrated. And all of that requires systems. Systems that require power, require maintenance, require funding. To coordinate, you need leadership. Someone people trust. Someone who can give orders that people believe will be followed. But leadership requires legitimacy. And legitimacy requires results. If you can't pay your own people, if you can't keep the lights on in your own office, if you can't move without someone tracking you, then leadership becomes symbolic. People respect you in theory, but in practice they stop listening. To fund anything, you need revenue. But if your revenue is controlled or conditional, every move you make requires permission. You can have soldiers, you can have territory, you can have popular support, but if you need permission to pay them, the fight is already over. You might think, but they can still resist. They can still organize underground. They can still refuse. And in theory, yes. In theory, resistance is always possible. But resistance requires resources, time, money, safety, secrecy, momentum. And all of those things require systems that someone has to maintain, systems that someone has to fund, systems that someone has to protect. If you control the revenue, you don't need to stop every individual. You just need to make organization impossible. You don't need to kill every rebel. You just need to make rebellion unfundable. The moment you need permission to resist, the fight is already over. This is what modern checkmate looks like. No tanks required. No grand battle. No Stalingrad. Just a quiet shift in who processes the payments, who signs the approvals, who decides what gets released and what gets delayed. So why doesn't it just reverse? Why can't you undo it once the pressure lifts? Why can't the old system just restart? Because speed creates facts on the ground. When control shifts quickly, institutions adapt quickly. New people take positions, not as invaders, as administrators, as coordinators, as liaisons. They don't announce themselves as occupiers, they announce themselves as helpers, temporary staff, technical experts brought in to keep things running during the transition. And once they're in those positions, they start making decisions, small ones at first, process changes, approval workflows, reporting structures, who needs to sign what, who reports to whom. And every small decision creates a new normal, a new way things are done. And once things are done a certain way for long enough, that becomes the structure. New systems process payments, not because someone declared it, but because the old system wasn't working and the new one was faster, more reliable, more efficient. And efficiency matters when people are desperate. So the new system becomes the system. And the people who run it become the administrators, and the administrators become the authority. New authorities issue orders, again, not as conquerors, as coordinators, as the people who actually know how to make things happen, as the people who have the access, the codes, the contacts, as the people who can actually get things done. And once people start obeying those orders because they work, because they produce results, because they solve problems, then obedience becomes habitual. Legal ambiguity works in favor of whoever holds the levers. Is this occupation? Is this administration? Is this transition? Is this stabilization? Is this partnership? The debate takes months. International lawyers argue. Diplomats draft statements. Committees convene. But the control is immediate. While everyone is debating definitions, the systems keep running. The payments keep processing. The authorities keep operating. And the longer they operate, the more entrenched they become. Power vacuums don't wait for legal clarity. They get filled by whoever is organized, by whoever can pay, by whoever can enforce. Temporary control extends because there's no alternative ready to replace it. And the longer it extends, the more permanent it feels. And the more permanent it feels, the more permanent it becomes. And here's the key. The system pays for itself. If you control the revenue, you can fund the enforcement that keeps you in control. You can pay the police who protect the administrators. You can fund the bureaucrats who process the forms. You can maintain the systems that channel the money. It's a loop, a self-reinforcing loop. The more you control, the more you can afford to keep controlling. The more you keep controlling, the more people depend on you. The more people depend on you, the harder it is to replace you. You don't need outside funding after the initial phase. The system generates its own resources. It funds its own perpetuation. Modern power doesn't conquer territory. It captures decision-making. It doesn't plant flags. It processes budgets. It doesn't declare sovereignty. It administers revenue. And once you administer revenue long enough, sovereignty becomes a formality, a legal category that doesn't match reality on the ground. And if this works once, it becomes a template, a playbook, a repeatable model. This isn't about liking or hating the United States. This isn't about defending or condemning any actor. This is about recognizing a playbook, a method, a structure. Remove leadership, quickly, precisely, before the system can react. Paralyze systems, cut communication, create confusion, prevent coordination, control revenue, not symbolically, literally, administer the flows, sign the approvals, process the payments, supervise transition, frame it as help, frame it as temporary, frame it as necessary, and let time do the rest. It's faster than war. It's cheaper than occupation. It's harder to reverse, and it's harder to condemn because it arrives as a solution, not a problem. Some people feel relief when this happens. That's real. They see chaos ending. They see order returning. They see services resuming. They see police on the streets who aren't demanding bribes. They see hospitals receiving supplies. They see lights staying on. That matters. That's not propaganda, that's lived experience. For someone who's been living through scarcity and fear, the arrival of order feels like salvation. But the precedent is dangerous. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Because the question isn't whether the outcome feels better for some people in the short term. The question is what kind of world we build when this method becomes normal. When this becomes the default way powerful states deal with weaker ones. When sovereignty becomes conditional. When independence becomes provisional. when control shifts not through diplomacy or war, but through administrative capture? What happens when speed replaces negotiation? When revenue control replaces territorial conquest? When temporary becomes permanent by design, not accident? When every financial crisis, every political instability, every moment of weakness becomes an opportunity for someone else to step in and take over the paperwork? What happens when every great power decides this is normal? That this is just how things work now? That this is the cost of doing business in a globalized world? That this is what stability requires? Because if this works in Venezuela, it can work elsewhere. If it works in a country with oil and institutions and a military, it can work in a country with rare earth minerals, or water rights, or strategic ports, or anything else someone wants. The mechanism is the same. Pressure, speed, revenue, lock-in. And once enough people see it work, once enough strategists study it, once enough policymakers adopt it, it stops being an exception. It becomes a doctrine. Venezuela didn't lose control because it was stupid. Its leaders weren't fools. Its people weren't passive. Its military wasn't weak. It lost control because pressure made reasonable choices irreversible, because every option required something it no longer had, because speed turned temporary into permanent, because revenue control turned sovereignty into permission. That's the real warning. Not that empires are cruel, we already knew that. Not that power is ruthless, we already knew that too. The warning is that power has found a new method, a method that doesn't look like conquest, a method that doesn't require mass violence, a method that arrives as help and leaves as control, a method that makes resistance structurally impossible before anyone realizes resistance was needed. Power doesn't always invade. Sometimes it just takes over the paperwork.